The notification sound from Celia's iPad cut through the midnight silence like a blade through paper. I sat in my basement office, surrounded by the familiar glow of 3 monitors, debugging code for a client's cybersecurity system. The soft ping shouldn't have bothered me. My wife got messages at all hours for her startup, but something about the timing felt wrong. "You were incredible tonight. Can't wait for our next meeting, L." The message preview glowed on her screen, which she'd left charging on my desk. My fingers froze above my keyboard. I read it again, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something innocent. They didn't. "I'm Jack Rourke, 43 years old, and I've spent the last 15 years building Greystone Digital into a respectable cybersecurity firm. I know how to read data, how to spot patterns, how to trace digital footprints. What I apparently don't know is how to read my own wife." Celia had been working late again, or so she claimed. Her revolutionary social media platform consumed her evenings, weekends, and most of our conversations. I'd supported her dream, even invested our savings into her venture. Now I wondered what exactly I'd been funding. The basement felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in with the weight of suspicion. I'd built this space as my sanctuary. Exposed brick walls, vintage movie posters, a leather chair that had seen better decades. Now it felt like a bunker where I'd retreated from my own marriage without realizing it. I picked up her iPad with trembling hands. The screen was still unlocked, the message thread open. My thumb hovered over the conversation, every instinct screaming at me to stop, to pretend I'd never seen it. But I've never been good at ignoring problems, especially ones written in plain English. The conversation stretched back weeks. Lunch meetings that turned into dinner, business discussions that devolved into flirtation, photos I wished I could unsee. My wife, the woman who complained about my morning coffee being too loud, had been conducting a full-blown affair with someone named Landon Pierce. The name triggered a memory, a former client from 3 years ago. Venture capitalist, early 40s, the kind of guy who wore expensive watches and talked about disrupting industries. He'd hired me to secure his firm's network after a minor breach. Professional, polite, and apparently very interested in my wife. Before we deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I set the iPad down carefully, as if it might explode. The house felt different now, tainted by knowledge I couldn't unknow. Every creak of the old Victorian's bones seemed like evidence of deception. How long had this been happening under my own roof? The rational part of my brain, the part that had built a successful business by thinking 3 steps ahead, began cataloging evidence. The late nights, the new perfume, the way she'd started locking her phone, the credit card bills I wasn't allowed to see anymore because she was handling the finances for her startup. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, each step feeling like walking through quicksand. Celia lay on her side, auburn hair spread across the pillow, breathing steadily. She looked peaceful, innocent even. The same woman who'd promised to love and honor me 12 years ago in a small church outside Portland. Back in my office, I did what I do best. I started digging. Our home network was my design, every device connected through systems I controlled. Within an hour, I had access to her cloud storage, her email accounts, her browsing history. The picture that emerged made my stomach turn. Hotel receipts, Uber rides to addresses across town, photos of her and Landon at restaurants I'd never been to, looking like a couple celebrating anniversaries I'd never shared. She'd been living an entirely separate life, funded by money from our joint account. The betrayal cut deep, but the financial deception stung worse. She'd been using our savings, money earmarked for the house renovation, for our future, to wine and dine her lover. Every romantic dinner, every weekend getaway, purchased with funds I'd earned debugging code at 2 a.m. I found her burner phone the next morning, hidden in her car's glove compartment. Our neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor King, had mentioned seeing Celia drop something while rushing to her car the day before. That ugly little phone, she'd called it, with the keen eye of someone who'd lived through 8 decades of neighborhood drama. The phone contained everything, text messages that would make a romance novelist blush. Plans for weekend trips, discussions about leaving their respective spouses, Landon promising to fund her startup in exchange for services that had nothing to do with social media platforms. I sat in my car outside our house, holding the evidence of my marriage's destruction. The morning was crisp, October in Maine painting the trees in shades of betrayal. I should have felt devastated. Instead, I felt something else entirely. A cold, calculating anger that reminded me why I'd been good at my job. Celia wanted to play games with technology. She'd picked the wrong opponent. I'd spent years protecting companies from people who thought they were smarter than the system. I knew how to trace financial transactions. how to monitor communications, how to build cases that would stand up in court. More importantly, I knew how to make someone's digital life very, very complicated. The plan began forming as I watched her through our kitchen window, sipping coffee and texting on her regular phone. She looked happy, probably planning her next rendezvous with Landon. She had no idea that her private world was about to become very public. I started with the joint accounts. As the primary account holder, I had every right to monitor transactions. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Thousands of dollars in charges I didn't recognize, hotel rooms, expensive dinners, jewelry purchases that never made it home to me. She'd been financing her affair with our money for months. The credit card she thought I didn't know about was registered to our address, but under her maiden name. Amateur hour. I had the statements within minutes. More hotels, more dinners. A weekend in Boston that coincided with a business conference she'd told me about. But the real treasure was her laptop, which synced to our home network every night. Her browser history read like a guidebook to infidelity. How to hide assets during divorce, how to claim emotional abuse, how to maximize alimony payments. She wasn't just cheating, she was planning her exit strategy. The woman upstairs, making breakfast and humming off-key to some pop song, had been preparing to destroy me financially and emotionally. The only question was whether she'd planned this from the beginning, or if Landon had convinced her to upgrade her betrayal. I called my office and told my assistant I'd be working from home. Then I settled in for a long day of digital archaeology. If Celia wanted to play the startup game, I'd help her learn about market crashes. By noon, I had enough evidence to end 3 marriages and probably get Landon investigated by the SEC. But evidence wasn't revenge. Evidence was just the foundation. What I built on top of it would determine whether I was the victim or the victor in this story. The house phone rang, startling me from my planning. Celia's voice drifted down from upstairs, sweet and concerned. "Hi, honey. Just checking in. I'll be late again tonight. Investor meeting. Love you." I listened to her lie with the same tone she'd used to say good morning. The casualness of it, the practiced ease, made me realize this wasn't a recent development. She'd been living this double life for so long it had become routine. "Love you too," I called back, and for the first time in months, I meant it. I loved the version of her that had existed before Landon Pierce. The woman who'd supported my business dreams, who'd painted our bedroom walls 3 different shades of blue before finding the right one, who'd cried at our wedding because she was so happy. That woman deserved justice. The woman upstairs deserved what was coming. Sam Salty Dalton's private investigation office sat above the Drowned Gull, a bar that had survived 3 economic downturns and countless attempts at gentrification. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed to meet the only person I trusted with this mess. Salty had been a cop for 20 years, before a knee injury and a pension dispute convinced him to go private. We'd met when he'd hired me to recover his ex-wife's attempts to hide assets in cryptocurrency. Professional relationship that became friendship over shared experiences with deceptive women. "Jack Rourke," he said, opening the door before I knocked. "You look like someone poured concrete in your coffee. Come in." His office was exactly what you'd expect from an ex-cop turned private investigator. Filing cabinets that had seen better decades, a desk covered in case files, and a coffee maker that probably violated several health codes. The smell of cigarettes and old leather hung in the air like a comfortable fog. "I need help," I said, settling into the client chair that had molded itself to accommodate countless stories of betrayal and disappointment. "Figured as much. You don't visit socially." Salty poured 2 cups of coffee that looked strong enough to dissolve paint. What's Celia done now? I'd never discussed my marriage with him, but Salty had investigator instincts that extended beyond his professional life. He'd probably noticed the signs before I had, the way she'd stopped mentioning me in conversations, the expensive clothes that didn't match our budget, the general air of someone living a secret life. "She's having an affair," I said, accepting the coffee, "with Landon Pierce." Salty's eyebrows rose. "The venture capitalist? Guy with the Porsche and the attitude problem?" "You know him?" "Know of him. He's got a reputation around town. Likes to play with other men's wives, especially when there's money involved. Usually targets women with access to business accounts or investment opportunities." Salty leaned back in his chair. "How long you known?" "Discovered it yesterday. But looking back, probably months." "Evidence?" I pulled out a tablet loaded with screenshots, financial records, and message threads. Salty reviewed everything with the methodical attention of someone who'd seen every variation of human deception. He made notes, asked clarifying questions, and built a timeline that painted an even worse picture than I'd imagined. "Started about 6 months ago," he concluded, "right around when she launched her startup. Classic pattern. He offers business support. She provides personal services. Both think they're using the other. Salty closed the tablet. Question is, what do you want to do about it? I want them to pay. Legally or practically? Both. Salty grinned, the expression of someone who'd been waiting for an interesting case. Now you're talking my language. Let's start with surveillance. Build a comprehensive picture, then we'll discuss options. We spent the afternoon planning. Salty would handle physical surveillance while I managed the digital investigation. He had contacts throughout the city, bartenders, hotel clerks, restaurant servers, people who noticed things and remembered faces. I had access to financial records, communication systems, and the kind of technical skills that could make someone's life very complicated. One thing, Salty said as I prepared to leave. You sure you want to go down this road? Once we start pulling threads, the whole sweater unravels. No going back to pretending everything's fine. I thought about Celia upstairs that morning, humming while she planned her next betrayal. The sweater's already unraveled. I'm just deciding what to do with the yarn. That evening, I played the perfect husband. Made dinner, asked about her day, listened to elaborate lies about investor meetings and platform development. She was good at it, maintaining eye contact, adding believable details, even showing appropriate fatigue from her long day of meetings. How's the funding coming along? I asked, twirling pasta around my fork. Slowly. These investors want to see everything. Business plans, financial projections, market analysis. It's exhausting. She sipped her wine, the picture of entrepreneurial stress. But I think we're close to a breakthrough. Anyone I know? Mostly out-of-town money. You wouldn't recognize the names. Another lie. According to her messages, Landon was her primary investor, and his funding came with expectations that had nothing to do with return on investment. She was essentially running an escort service disguised as a tech startup. After dinner, she retreated to her office to work on presentations. I went to my basement and worked on presentations of my own, comprehensive documentation of her activities that would be very useful in divorce proceedings. The next morning, Salty called with his first report. Followed her yesterday evening. No investor meeting. She went straight to Pierce's apartment building, that glass tower downtown. Stayed 3 hours. Left looking like she'd been through a wind tunnel. Anything else? Pierce has a routine. Gym at 6 a.m., office by 8, lunch at that Italian place on Commercial Street. Drives like he owns the road. Parks in the same spot every day, reserved space in the garage under his building. Security cameras? Plenty, but I know a guy who knows a guy. We can get footage if we need it. We needed it. By the end of the week, we had video evidence of Celia entering and leaving Landon's building on multiple occasions. We had restaurant receipts showing dinners for two charged to her secret credit card. We had hotel records from their weekend getaway to Boston. More importantly, I'd discovered something interesting about Landon's business practices. He had a history of investing in women-owned startups that never seemed to produce actual products. 3 different women over the past 5 years, all attractive, all married, all eventually divorced after their businesses mysteriously failed. He's running a pattern, I told Salty over lunch at the Drowned Gull. Targets married women with access to money, promises business investment in exchange for personal services, then disappears when things get complicated. Classic con man behavior. Question is, does your wife know she's being played? I'd wondered the same thing. Celia was smart, educated, capable of running her own business if she wanted, but the messages I'd read suggested she genuinely believed Landon was going to make her rich and famous. She was a victim too, in a way. That sympathy lasted until I found her real plan. Hidden in her cloud storage, buried in a folder labeled Business Expenses, was a document that made my stomach drop. A consultation with a divorce attorney dated 2 weeks ago. She'd been asking about asset division, spousal support, and how to maximize her settlement. The consultation notes were brutal. She'd painted me as controlling, financially abusive, and emotionally distant. She'd claimed credit for building my business, despite having no involvement in Greystone Digital beyond occasionally answering the phone. She'd even suggested I might be hiding assets, which was rich considering her secret credit cards and mystery investments. But the worst part was her strategy. She planned to file for divorce immediately after securing Landon's investment, claiming she needed financial independence to escape my controlling behavior. She'd use his money to hire expensive lawyers while I scrambled to protect the business I'd built from scratch. She's not just cheating, I told Salty that evening. She's planning to destroy me. Changes things, doesn't it? It did. I'd been prepared to be the wounded husband, to take the moral high ground and let the legal system sort things out. But Celia had declared war, and she'd chosen weapons designed to destroy everything I'd worked for. Time to show her what real warfare looked like. I started with the joint accounts. As the primary holder, I had every right to monitor and restrict access. I didn't drain them, that would be illegal, but I did set up alerts for every transaction over $50. Suddenly her secret spending would require explanations. Next, I changed the passwords on our shared streaming services, cloud storage, and home network, small inconveniences that would force her to ask questions she couldn't answer honestly. Then I got creative. I created a fake email account and sent anonymous tips to the IRS about Landon's business practices. I sent similar tips to the state attorney general's office about potential securities fraud. I even reached out to the 3 women from his previous investments and suggested they might want to compare notes. None of it was illegal. All of it was designed to make Landon's life complicated at exactly the wrong time. The first sign my campaign was working came 3 days later. Celia was on the phone in her office, voice raised in frustration. "What do you mean the account is frozen? It's my account." I smiled, continuing to work on my laptop. She'd tried to use the credit card for another romantic dinner. The fraud alert I'd triggered had resulted in a temporary hold pending verification of recent charges. "This is ridiculous. I'll call you back." She appeared in my office doorway, face flushed with anger. "Jack, did you do something to my credit card?" "Which credit card?" I asked innocently. "I thought you were using the business account for startup expenses." The backup card, for emergencies." "Didn't know we had a backup card. Maybe you should call the company and straighten it out." She stared at me for a long moment, probably wondering how much I knew. Then she forced a smile and retreated to her office to make more phone calls. The next morning, Salty reported that Landon had been visited by federal investigators. Nothing dramatic, just questions about his investment practices and tax filings, but enough to make him nervous. "He's been making phone calls all day," Salty reported. "Lawyers, accountants, that kind of thing. Also noticed he's been drinking more at lunch." "Good. Nervous people make mistakes." "Speaking of mistakes, your wife tried to withdraw $5,000 from your business account yesterday. Bank called to verify." "What did you tell them?" "That you'd call back to confirm. Figured you'd want to handle that personally." I called the bank and confirmed that Celia was not authorized to make withdrawals from the business account. I also requested detailed statements for the past year, just to see what other surprises might be waiting. That evening, Celia was unusually quiet during dinner. She picked at her food, checked her phone constantly, and jumped every time it rang. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Fine, just startup stress. You know how it is." "I do. Building a business is hard work. Lots of moving parts, lots of opportunities for things to go wrong." She looked at me sharply, as if trying to determine whether there was hidden meaning in my words. There was, but she'd have to figure that out herself. After dinner, she disappeared into her office again. I could hear her making phone calls, voice low and urgent, probably trying to figure out why her carefully laid plans were suddenly encountering obstacles. I went to my basement and continued my own planning. Phase 1 had been discovery and disruption. Phase 2 would be exposure and humiliation. By the time I was finished, everyone in town would know exactly what kind of woman I'd married and what kind of man she'd chosen to replace me. But first, I needed to set the perfect trap. The Drowned Gull on a Wednesday night was perfect for clandestine meetings. Dim lighting, background noise from the jukebox, and Greta behind the bar who'd seen enough drama to mind her own business. I sat in the corner booth, nursing a beer and waiting for Dutch Marston to arrive. Dutch had been my roommate in college, back when we both thought we'd change the world through technology. He'd gone the venture capital route while I'd chosen cybersecurity. Different paths, but we'd maintained our friendship through quarterly poker games and occasional business referrals. More importantly, Dutch was one of the investors Celia had been courting for her startup. "Jack Rourke, you magnificent bastard," Dutch said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Haven't seen you since the poker game where you cleaned out half of Portland's tech scene." "That was skill, not luck," I replied, shaking his hand. "Thanks for meeting me." "Your message was intriguing. Something about a business opportunity that required discretion?" Dutch signaled Greta for a beer. "I'm listening." I'd spent days crafting this approach. Dutch needed to understand the situation without feeling manipulated. He also needed to see how helping me would benefit his own interests. "What do you know about Landon Pierce?" I asked. Dutch's expression shifted slightly. "Pierce? He's got a reputation. Smart investor, but his methods are questionable. Why?" "He's been courting my wife for her startup. I think she's being played." "Your wife? Celia, the social media platform?" "That's the one. How much do you know about her pitch?" Dutch looked uncomfortable. "Jack, I don't want to get in the middle of marital issues." "This isn't about marriage. It's about business. I think Pierce is running a con, and Celia's not the first victim." I showed him the research I'd compiled on Landon's previous investments. 3 women, 3 failed startups, 3 messy divorces. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. He targets married women with access to capital, I explained. Promises investment and business success. But the real goal is personal access. When things get complicated, he disappears and the women are left with nothing. Dutch studied the documents, his investor instincts taking over. This is concerning. If he's using investment fraud to facilitate affairs, that's securities violations on top of everything else. Exactly. And if Celia's being set up the same way, she could face legal consequences for activities she doesn't fully understand. It was a careful balance, presenting Celia as a victim while positioning myself as the protective husband trying to save her from herself. Dutch didn't need to know about the divorce consultation or her plans to destroy me financially. "What do you want me to do?" Dutch asked. "She's scheduled to make a presentation to your investment group next week. I want you to be there, ask the right questions, and help expose what Pierce is really after. And if she's a willing participant in whatever game they're playing, then she deserves whatever consequences follow." Dutch agreed to help, partly out of friendship and partly out of genuine concern about investment fraud in his industry. We spent another hour planning the presentation, identifying questions that would force Celia to reveal the true nature of her relationship with Landon. The next morning, I implemented phase 2 of my strategy. I'd discovered that Celia's startup had applied for a small business loan using our house as collateral. She'd forged my signature on the application, which was illegal, but more importantly, it gave me leverage. I called the bank and informed them that I hadn't authorized the loan application. Within hours, they'd frozen the process and launched an internal investigation. Celia's funding timeline, already complicated by the credit card issues, became impossible. I also reached out to my contact at the local newspaper's business section. Jennifer Walsh had covered my company's growth over the years, and she owed me a favor after I'd helped her expose a cryptocurrency scam the previous year. "I have a story for you," I told her over lunch. "Investment fraud targeting women entrepreneurs." "I'm listening." I gave her the same information I'd shared with Dutch, minus the personal details about my marriage. She was particularly interested in the pattern of failed businesses and the potential securities violations. "This could be a big story," she said, "but I'll need sources willing to go on record." "I'm working on that. Give me a week." The pieces were falling into place. Dutch would handle the investor presentation, Jennifer would prepare the media exposure, and I'd continue monitoring Celia's activities through digital surveillance. But I needed one more element: public humiliation that would make the story impossible to ignore. That evening, Celia was more agitated than I'd seen her since this began. She'd spent the day trying to resolve the loan application issue, only to discover that someone had reported potential fraud. She'd also learned that several of her other funding sources were suddenly unavailable. "I don't understand what's happening," she said over dinner. "Everything was progressing smoothly, and now it's like the entire financial system is working against me." "Maybe it's a sign," I suggested. "Sometimes when everything goes wrong at once, the universe is trying to tell you something." "I don't believe in signs. I believe in hard work and persistence." "How's Landon handling the setbacks?" She paused, fork halfway to her mouth. "Why would you ask about Landon? He's your primary investor, right? These delays must be affecting his timeline too." He's being very supportive. He says these things happen in business." Sounds like a good partner to have during difficult times. Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, he is." I could see her trying to decide how much to reveal, weighing the benefits of honesty against the risks of exposure. She chose deception, as she had for months. After dinner, she made her usual retreat to her office. I could hear her on the phone, voice strained with stress. Probably updating Landon on the day's disasters and trying to figure out their next move. I went to my basement and checked the surveillance systems I'd installed. Her computer activity showed desperate searches for alternative funding sources. Her phone records revealed multiple calls to Landon, each conversation longer and more urgent than the last. She was panicking, which meant she was vulnerable to mistakes. The next morning, I played my ace card. I sent an anonymous email to Celia, claiming to be a former business partner of Landon's with information about his investment strategies. The email suggested a meeting at a coffee shop downtown during lunch hours when the place would be crowded. She took the bait. Salty positioned himself at the coffee shop with a camera, while I monitored her location through the phone tracking app she'd never bothered to disable. At exactly noon, she walked into what she thought was a clandestine meeting with a mysterious source. Instead, she found an empty table and a note directing her to a website I'd created overnight. The site contained detailed information about Landon's previous victims, complete with photos, testimonials, and financial records showing the pattern of seduction and abandonment. The final page contained a simple message: "You're next." Salty reported that she'd read the entire site on her phone, growing paler with each page. She'd tried calling Landon multiple times, but he didn't answer. She'd sat in the coffee shop for an hour, probably trying to process the possibility that her perfect business partner was actually a predator. That evening, she confronted me directly for the first time. "Jack, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." We were in the living room, the space where we'd once planned our future together. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Of course," I said, settling into my reading chair. "Have you been interfering with my business?" "In what way?" "The loan application, the credit card issues, the problems with investors. It feels like someone is deliberately sabotaging my efforts." I looked at her with what I hoped was genuine concern. "Why would you think that?" "Because you're the only person who would have access to our financial accounts and personal information." "Celia, if I wanted to sabotage your business, don't you think I'd be more direct about it? We're married. I could just ask you to stop." "Could you?" "What do you mean? Could you ask me to stop? Or would you try to control the situation without involving me in the decision?" It was a clever reversal, turning her deception into my character flaw. She was better at this game than I'd given her credit for. "I've supported your business from the beginning," I said. "I've invested our savings, given you space to work, encouraged you through every setback. Why would I suddenly want you to fail?" "I don't know. That's why I'm asking." We stared at each other across the room, both knowing the conversation was about more than business sabotage. She was testing how much I knew, while I was testing how far she'd go to maintain her deception. "I want you to succeed," I said finally. "But I also want you to be careful. There are people in the business world who prey on entrepreneurs, especially women. They promise support and investment, but their real motives are personal." "Are you talking about someone specific?" "I'm talking about being smart, protecting yourself, making sure your business partners have your best interests at heart." She nodded slowly, probably wondering if I knew about Landon or if I was speaking generally about business risks. "I should get back to work," she said, standing up. "The presentation to Dutch's group is next week, and I need everything to be perfect." "I'm sure it will be." She paused at the doorway. "Jack, thank you for supporting me even when things get complicated. That's what partners do." After she left, I sat in the quiet living room, thinking about partnerships and betrayal. She'd given me an opening to end this cleanly, a chance to confront her directly and work through our problems like adults. Instead, I opened my laptop and continued planning her destruction. Some partnerships don't deserve to be saved. The Eastport Conference Center buzzed with the energy of ambitious entrepreneurs and skeptical investors. I sat in the back row of the presentation room, officially there to support my wife's big moment, actually there to watch her world collapse in real time. Celia stood at the front of the room, looking professional in her navy blazer and confident smile. She'd spent days preparing for this presentation, crafting slides that promised revolutionary social media engagement and unprecedented market opportunities. She had no idea that half the people in the room already knew the truth about her business model. Dutch sat in the front row with his investment committee, playing his role perfectly. He'd spent the week asking subtle questions around town about Landon's business practices, ensuring that rumors would reach the right ears before today's presentation. Jennifer Walsh sat 3 rows ahead of me, notebook ready, prepared to document whatever revelations emerged from the question and answer session. Landon occupied a seat near the middle, playing the supportive business partner. He'd been dodging Celia's calls since the coffee shop incident, but he couldn't miss this presentation without raising suspicions. He looked nervous, checking his phone constantly and avoiding eye contact with other attendees. "Good afternoon, everyone," Celia began, her voice clear and confident. "Thank you for taking time to learn about Social Sphere, the platform that will revolutionize how businesses connect with their customers." She launched into her prepared remarks, describing market opportunities and technological innovations with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely believed in her product. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. She'd put real work into this presentation, real thought into the business concept. Under different circumstances, with honest funding and proper support, she might have succeeded. But she'd chosen a different path, and now she had to walk it to the end. The presentation went smoothly for the first 20 minutes. Celia handled basic questions about market size and competitive advantages with practiced ease. She displayed charts showing projected growth and user acquisition that looked impressive to anyone who didn't know where the funding was really coming from. Then Dutch raised his hand. Ms. Rourke, can you tell us about your current funding sources? Specifically, how much capital you've raised and from which investors? Celia's smile flickered slightly. We've secured initial seed funding from private investors who prefer to remain anonymous at this stage. Anonymous investors are unusual in today's market, Dutch continued. Most VCs want public recognition for their successful investments. Can you share any details about these investors' backgrounds or areas of expertise? As I mentioned, they prefer anonymity, but they have extensive experience in social media and technology ventures. Dutch nodded, making notes. And what's your current burn rate? How long will your existing funding last? The questions continued, each one designed to expose the gaps in her business plan. Dutch was masterful, never accusatory, always professional, but relentlessly focused on the financial details that Celia couldn't explain honestly. Other investors joined in, asking about revenue projections, customer acquisition costs, and competitive positioning. Celia handled most questions competently, but her confidence was clearly shaking as the focus shifted to areas where her preparation had been inadequate. Then someone asked the question I'd been waiting for. Ms. Rourke, I understand Landon Pierce is involved in your funding. Can you describe his role in your company? The room went quiet. Landon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, probably wishing he'd skipped the presentation entirely. Mr. Pierce is one of several investors who've expressed interest in our platform, Celia said carefully. Interest or actual investment? Because I've heard conflicting reports about his recent business activities. Celia looked toward Landon, seeking support or guidance. He avoided her gaze, suddenly fascinated by his phone screen. Mr. Pierce has been very supportive of our vision, she said finally. Supportive how? Financially? Strategically? Personally? The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to spread. Celia realized she was walking into dangerous territory, but she had no graceful way to retreat. He's provided both financial and strategic guidance, she said. Can you quantify the financial support? Dollar amounts, investment terms, equity percentages? Those details are confidential pending final documentation. Dutch leaned forward. Ms. Rourke, with respect, we're potential investors ourselves. If Mr. Pierce has already committed significant capital, that affects our own investment considerations. Surely you can provide basic information about existing commitments? Celia was trapped. She couldn't provide financial details because there weren't any legitimate ones to provide. Landon's investment had come in the form of hotel rooms and restaurant meals, not actual business capital. We're still finalizing the terms of Mr. Pierce's investment, she said. Still finalizing? How long have you been working with him? Several months. Several months to finalize an investment agreement? That seems unusual. Most seed funding closes within weeks once terms are agreed upon. The questions kept coming, each one exposing another gap in her story. Other attendees began whispering among themselves, sensing drama but not yet understanding its full scope. Finally, Dutch delivered the decisive blow. Ms. Rourke, I've done some research on Mr. Pierce's investment history. He's been associated with several women-owned startups over the past few years, but none of them seem to have achieved commercial success. Can you comment on why his previous investments failed and how your company will avoid similar outcomes? The room was completely silent now. Everyone understood that the question was about more than just business performance. Celia looked at Landon again, this time with something approaching desperation. He was studying his phone as if it contained the secrets of the universe. I'm not familiar with Mr. Pierce's other investments, she said quietly. Really? You've been working with him for months, but you haven't researched his track record. That seems like basic due diligence for any entrepreneur. We focused on our own business rather than past performance. Ms. Rourke, Dutch said, his voice gentle but implacable, I think this committee needs more information before we can consider any investment. Perhaps you could provide documentation of Mr. Pierce's actual financial commitment, along with references from his previous business partners? Celia nodded numbly, probably realizing that the presentation was over and her startup dreams were collapsing in real time. Of course. I'll get you that information. Thank you. We'll table this discussion until you can provide more comprehensive financial documentation. The room began to empty, investors and entrepreneurs moving on to the next presentation. Celia stood at the front, gathering her materials with shaking hands. Landon had disappeared without speaking to her, leaving her to face the aftermath alone. I approached her as she packed up her laptop. How did it go? I asked, as if I hadn't witnessed the entire disaster. Not as well as I hoped, she said, not meeting my eyes. What kind of information do they need? Financial documentation, investment agreements, references. That shouldn't be a problem, right? You have all that from your investors? She looked at me then, and I saw something I'd never seen before in her eyes, genuine fear. It's complicated, she said. How complicated? Jack, I think I might have made some mistakes. It was the closest she'd come to honesty in months. For a moment, I considered offering her a way out, a chance to confess everything and work together to minimize the damage. But then I remembered the divorce consultation, the forged loan documents, the months of lies and betrayal. She'd made her choices. Now she could live with the consequences. What kind of mistakes? I asked. I trusted someone I shouldn't have trusted. Landon. She nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. What did he do? He promised things he couldn't deliver, and I believed him because I wanted to believe him. What kind of promises? She was quiet for a long moment, probably trying to decide how much truth she could afford to reveal. Business promises, she said finally. Investment commitments that weren't as solid as I thought. Is that all? Another pause, longer this time. Yes, she lied. That's all. We drove home in silence, both of us processing what had happened, but from very different perspectives. She was probably wondering how to salvage her business and her relationship with Landon. I was planning the next phase of her destruction. That evening, Jennifer Walsh called. Interesting presentation today, she said. I think there's a story here, but I need more sources. Any chance those other women Pierce worked with might be willing to talk? I'll make some calls, I promised. Also, I did some digging on the business registration for Social Sphere. There are some irregularities in the filing documents that might interest law enforcement. What kind of irregularities? Forged signatures on loan applications, misrepresented financial information, possible tax issues. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Celia's mistakes were compounding, creating legal problems that would extend far beyond simple business failure. Keep digging, I told Jennifer. I think this story is bigger than either of us realized. After I hung up, I sat in my basement office, surrounded by the evidence of my wife's betrayal and my own methodical revenge. Phase 3 was about to begin, and it would be more devastating than anything that had come before. Celia wanted to play with fire. Time to show her what happens when the house burns down. The story broke on a Thursday morning, splashed across the business section of the Portland Herald with a headline that made my coffee taste sweeter. Local investment fraud targets women entrepreneurs. Jennifer Walsh had done exceptional work, weaving together the stories of Landon's previous victims with enough detail to make the pattern undeniable. 3 women, 3 failed businesses, 3 destroyed marriages. The article carefully avoided naming current victims, but anyone who'd attended Celia's presentation would understand the implications. I read the article twice over breakfast, admiring the careful construction of Jennifer's prose. She'd managed to be both factual and devastating, presenting Landon as a predator who used business promises to facilitate personal relationships, then disappeared when things became complicated. The article also mentioned irregularities in recent business filings that were under investigation by state authorities. No names, but the timeline made it clear which startup was involved. Upstairs, Celia's phone was ringing constantly. I could hear her voice through the ceiling, strained and defensive, probably fielding calls from investors, lawyers, and reporters who'd connected the dots between the article and her presentation. By noon, the story had spread to social media and local news websites. The comment sections were brutal, filled with speculation about Landon's current victim and harsh judgments about women who should have known better. I felt a moment of sympathy for Celia, watching her reputation destroyed by strangers who didn't know the full story. Then I remembered the divorce consultation and the forged loan documents, and the sympathy evaporated. Salty called around lunchtime with an update on Landon's activities. He's in full damage control mode, Salty reported. Spent the morning with lawyers, afternoon trying to reach his previous investors. Word is he's looking to liquidate assets and leave town. Running away? Looks like it. He's not the type to stick around and fight when things get complicated. What about his relationship with Celia? Haven't seen them together since the presentation. My guess is he's cutting ties to minimize his own exposure. Perfect. Landon's abandonment would force Celia to face the consequences alone, without the emotional support that had sustained her through months of deception. That evening, she finally came downstairs to confront me directly. Jack, we need to talk. She looked exhausted, her usual polish replaced by the haggard appearance of someone who'd spent the day watching their world collapse. She'd aged years in a single day. Of course, I said, gesturing toward the living room. What's on your mind? You know what's on my mind. The newspaper article, the investigation, the timing of everything falling apart at once. It's unfortunate timing, I agreed. But these things happen in business. Bad actors get exposed, and everyone associated with them suffers consequences. Don't play games with me, Jack. I know you're involved in this somehow. Involved how? The loan application problems, the credit card issues, the anonymous tip that led to the newspaper investigation. It's too coordinated to be coincidence. I studied her face, noting the desperation beneath the accusation. She knew she was trapped, but she was still trying to find a way to shift blame to me. Celia, if you're having business problems, maybe it's because your business model was flawed from the beginning. My business model was fine. The problem started when someone began sabotaging my funding sources. Or maybe the problem started when you decided to base your business on a relationship with a man who has a history of defrauding women entrepreneurs. The words hung between us like a challenge. She could continue denying the obvious, or she could finally tell the truth about her relationship with Landon. Landon isn't... It wasn't like that, she said weakly. Wasn't like what? Like the article described. He genuinely believed in my business. Is that all he believed in? A long pause. She was trying to decide how much truth she could afford to reveal, weighing the benefits of honesty against the risks of full disclosure. Jack, I made some mistakes. What kind of mistakes? I trusted someone I shouldn't have trusted. I let business relationships become complicated. Complicated how? You know how. Finally, a hint of honesty. Not a full confession, but an acknowledgement that her relationship with Landon had extended beyond business. Do I? You've been very secretive about your business activities lately. Working late, taking meetings I'm not invited to, making financial decisions without discussing them with me. I was trying to build something of my own, something that didn't depend on your success or your approval. By having an affair with your investor? The question hit her like a physical blow. She actually stepped backward, as if I'd raised my hand to strike her. We didn't what? Didn't spend months exchanging intimate messages? Didn't take weekend trips together? Didn't plan a future that didn't include me? Her face went pale as she realized how much I knew. How long have you known? She whispered. Long enough. Then why didn't you say something? Why didn't you confront me directly instead of... this? She gestured vaguely, encompassing the newspaper article, the business collapse, the systematic destruction of her secret life. Because I wanted to see how far you'd go, I said. I wanted to understand whether you were a victim of Landon's manipulation or a willing participant in your own deception. And what did you conclude? I pulled out my tablet and showed her the divorce consultation notes I'd discovered in her cloud storage. I concluded that you weren't just having an affair. You were planning to destroy me financially and emotionally, using Landon's money to hire lawyers who would paint me as an abusive husband while you walked away with half of everything I'd built. She stared at the screen, probably wondering how I'd accessed her private files. Jack, I can explain. No need. The documents are self-explanatory. You've been planning this for months, maybe longer. The affair was just the first step in a larger strategy to replace your old life with a better one. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? I felt trapped, invisible, like I was just an accessory to your success instead of a person with my own dreams and ambitions. So you decided to have an affair and steal our money to fund your escape? I decided to build something of my own, and yes, I made mistakes along the way. Mistakes like forging my signature on loan documents? Mistakes like using our joint accounts to fund romantic getaways with your lover? Mistakes like planning to accuse me of abuse to maximize your divorce settlement? Each accusation hit home, and I could see her defenses crumbling as she realized the extent of my knowledge. I never meant for things to go this far, she said quietly. But they did go this far, and now you have to deal with the consequences. What consequences? The state is investigating your business for fraud. The IRS is reviewing your tax filings. Your reputation in the local business community is destroyed. And Landon, the man you thought would save you from your terrible marriage, has disappeared rather than face the consequences of his own actions. She sank into the couch, finally understanding the full scope of her situation. What do you want from me, Jack? I want you to understand that actions have consequences. You wanted to play games with our marriage, our finances, and our future. Now you get to live with the results. Are you filing for divorce? That depends on you. What do you mean? I mean, you have a choice. You can continue fighting, hiring lawyers with money you don't have, trying to salvage something from this mess. Or you can accept responsibility for what you've done and work with me to end this marriage with some dignity intact. What would that look like? You move out. You take your personal belongings and your car. You don't contest the divorce, and you don't make any claims on the business or the house. In exchange, I don't pursue criminal charges for the forged loan documents or the misuse of joint funds. That's it? I get nothing? You get to avoid prison. Under the circumstances, that's generous. She sat quietly for several minutes, probably trying to find some alternative that would leave her in a better position, but we both knew she was out of options. How long do I have to decide? 24 hours. And if I don't agree? Then we do this the hard way. Lawyers, criminal charges, public testimony about your affair and your business fraud. Your choice. She nodded slowly, tears finally beginning to flow. Jack, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am genuinely sorry for what I put you through. I'm sure you are. Sorry you got caught, sorry your plan didn't work, sorry Landon turned out to be exactly what everyone warned you he was. I'm sorry I hurt you. No, you're not. You're sorry you lost. There's a difference. I left her sitting in the living room, surrounded by the wreckage of her own making. Tomorrow she'd give me her answer, but we both knew what it would be. She was beaten, and she knew it. In my basement office, I opened a bottle of wine and toasted my own reflection in the computer screen. It had taken months of careful planning, but I'd achieved everything I'd set out to accomplish. Celia was exposed, Landon was ruined, and I was free to rebuild my life without the weight of their deception. Some might call it revenge. I called it justice. Either way, it tasted like victory. Celia's answer came the next morning, delivered in a single-word text message. Agreed. I found her in the kitchen, sipping coffee and staring out the window at the October morning. She'd packed 2 suitcases, which sat by the front door like sentinels guarding her exit from our shared life. Where will you go? I asked, pouring my own coffee. My sister's place in Boston, until I figure out what comes next. What about your business? What business? Social sphere is finished. The investigation, the bad publicity, the lack of funding, there's nothing left to salvage. She spoke with the flat affect of someone who'd spent the night accepting the unacceptable. Her dreams of entrepreneurial success had evaporated along with her marriage and her reputation. You could start over somewhere else, I suggested, though I wasn't sure why I was offering comfort to someone who'd planned my destruction. With what? I have no money, no credibility, and a business history that's about to become a cautionary tale in every investment blog in New England. She was right, of course. The story of her affair and business fraud would follow her for years, making it nearly impossible to secure legitimate funding for future ventures. You're smart, capable. You'll find a way. Will I? Or will I spend the rest of my life paying for mistakes I made when I was trying to build something meaningful? It was a fair question, one that made me examine my own motivations. I'd wanted her to face consequences for her betrayal, but I hadn't considered the long-term implications of the destruction I'd orchestrated. That's up to you, I said finally. She nodded, accepting the non-answer for what it was. Jack, can I ask you something? When did you stop loving me? The question caught me off guard, forcing me to confront emotions I'd buried under months of anger and planning. I'm not sure I did stop loving you, I said honestly. I stopped loving what you became, but I never stopped loving who you used to be. The woman who supported your dreams instead of pursuing her own. The woman who was honest with me. The woman who didn't forge documents or plan elaborate deceptions. The woman who would have talked to me if she felt trapped instead of having an affair. Maybe that woman never existed. Maybe I was just playing a role I thought you wanted me to play. Maybe, but if that's true, then our entire marriage was a lie, and you're not the victim you're pretending to be. She finished her coffee and stood up, smoothing her skirt with hands that only trembled slightly. I'll have a lawyer contact you about the divorce paperwork. Keep it simple, and it'll be quick. I will. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Jack, you were right about Landon. He disappeared the moment things got complicated. 12 years of marriage, and you were the one who warned me about him. I tried to warn you in general terms. You chose not to listen. I chose to believe what I wanted to believe instead of what I knew to be true. She picked up her suitcases and walked to the door. I followed, feeling obligated to witness the end of what we'd built together. Celia? She turned back, hope flickering in her eyes as if I might offer some last-minute reprieve. Don't make the same mistakes again. Next time you feel trapped or invisible, try talking to your partner before you start planning their destruction. The hope died, replaced by something that might have been respect. I'll remember that. She left without looking back, climbing into her car and driving away from 12 years of shared history. I watched from the front window until she disappeared around the corner, then returned to the kitchen to finish my coffee in silence. The house felt different immediately, Larger somehow, but also emptier. I'd gotten what I wanted, but victory felt more complicated than I'd expected. Salty called around noon with a final report on Landon's activities. He left town yesterday, Salty said. Cleaned out his apartment, liquidated his local assets, and headed south. Word is he's got family in Florida. Think he'll resurface? Men like Pierce always resurface. He'll wait for the heat to die down, then start the same game somewhere else with different victims. At least it won't be here. True. How's Celia handling everything? She moved out this morning, going to stay with family while she figures out what comes next. Any regrets? It was a good question, one I'd been asking myself since watching her drive away. I regret that it came to this, I said. I regret that she chose deception over communication, and I regret that I chose revenge over reconciliation. But you don't regret exposing the truth? No. She made her choices, and I made mine. We both have to live with the consequences. Fair enough. You need anything, you know where to find me. That afternoon, I walked through the house, noting the spaces where Celia's belongings had been. Her office, stripped of personal items, looked like a crime scene after the evidence had been collected. Our bedroom felt cavernous without her clothes in the closet and her books on the nightstand. I should have felt liberated, free to rebuild my life without the weight of her deception. Instead, I felt hollow, as if the victory I'd worked so hard to achieve had cost more than I'd been prepared to pay. Jennifer Walsh called that evening with an update on her investigation. The State Attorney General's office is moving forward with the fraud investigation, she reported. Looks like they have enough evidence to file charges, but they are focusing on Pierce rather than the women he manipulated. What about Celia? She'll probably have to testify, but I don't think they'll pursue criminal charges. The prosecutor sees her as a victim who got in over her head. That's something, I suppose. Jack, can I ask you something off the record? Sure. How does it feel, getting justice for what she did to you? I thought about Celia driving away that morning, about the hollow feeling in the house, about the victory that tasted more like ashes than wine. It feels like justice, I said, but it doesn't feel like healing. Those are two different things. Yes, they are. After I hung up, I sat in my basement office, surrounded by the evidence of my successful campaign, financial records, surveillance photos, email transcripts, the complete documentation of a marriage's destruction. I'd proven that I was smarter than my cheating wife and her manipulative lover. I'd exposed their deception, destroyed their plans, and emerged victorious from a conflict I never wanted to fight. But sitting alone in a house that no longer felt like home, I wondered if victory was worth the price I'd paid for it. Outside, the October wind rattled the windows, carrying the promise of winter and the certainty of change. I had what I'd wanted, freedom from deception, vindication for my pain, and the satisfaction of seeing justice served. Whether I had what I needed was a different question entirely. The phone rang, interrupting my brooding. Dutch's name appeared on the caller ID. Jack, I wanted to check in after everything that's happened. I'm fine, Dutch. Thank you for asking. I also wanted to apologize for my role in what happened at the presentation. You did what I asked you to do. No apology necessary. Still, it feels like I participated in something that went beyond business. You helped expose fraud and manipulation. That's a public service. Maybe, but watching someone's life fall apart in real time, even someone who made bad choices, doesn't feel like victory. No, I agreed. It doesn't. You going to be okay? I'm going to be fine. Different, but fine. If you need anything, someone to talk to, help getting back into the social scene, whatever, let me know. I will. After Dutch hung up, I realized that people would be watching to see how I handled my newfound freedom. Some would expect me to celebrate, to embrace the bachelor life with enthusiasm. Others would expect me to mourn, to show appropriate grief for my failed marriage. I felt neither celebratory nor mournful. I felt tired, as if I'd spent months running a marathon that ended not with triumph, but with the simple relief of being able to stop running. The house settled around me, creaking and sighing in the way old houses do when the temperature drops. I'd lived here for 8 years, but tonight it felt like a stranger's home, filled with furniture and memories that belonged to people I used to be. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of rebuilding, new routines, new goals, new relationships that weren't built on deception and revenge. I'd figure out what came after victory, what filled the space that justice had carved out of my life. But tonight, I sat in my basement office, surrounded by the evidence of what I'd accomplished, and tried to decide whether the man who'd planned and executed this campaign was someone I wanted to continue being.